arrangements, they affect, they are effective in a situation where there are few holdouts, so that you can actually say that, okay, for these two banks, they are recalcitrant, I'll close them down, and I'll not destroy the entire industry. Where you have 30% of banks refusing to do it, you cannot close 30% of banks, because the contagion will destroy the entire financial industry. So in those circumstances, you cannot even use your punitive instruments. And if you look at all the punitive instruments the government truly have, none of them are effective. So if your punitive instruments are not effective, and therefore you don't have any strong battler, why adopt the kind of posture that the government has adopted, which is essentially that we have to ensure that we simply do what it is telling us to do, or we will suffer the consequence. That cannot work. In worst case scenario, all Ghanaians will suffer the consequences, not just 1 point something million debt holders. So in those scenarios, I just don't see the basis on which the government feels that it has a stronger position. Last critical point is that, yes, it is true that the government has significant holdings in the financial industry. So it has some insurance companies, it even has some financial services players on the financial services industry, in the capital markets and the rest of it. The truth, though, is that if they decide to break ranks and decide to accept truly bad terms, as some of the banks have shown, that if you do this, our balance sheets are going to be ripped to shreds, they become uncompetitive immediately. So if GCB or one of those other institutions decide that for us, we are going to take on the government offer, regardless of what the rest of the industry does, well, the industry just waits for them to reduce their income and outcompete them. And if they get totally outcompeted, that really is the end. So what does this all mean? In summary, all this means is very simple. The government has only one optimization equation. It can reduce the amount of liquidity relief it wants. That's how much it wants these rich people or these not so rich people and these pensioners to give up to it in order for it to, lower its current burden. It can reduce the amount it wants in order to increase the participation, or it can stay where it is and lower the participation. There's no other way around it. And if it continues at the pace at which it's going, then it's going to get maybe about 30% participation rate, which will still correspond to roughly 30% of liquidity relief, simply meaning that today, the government is trying to get something in the excess of, in the beginning, it was trying to get in excess of $2 billion relief in only 2023, this year, from private people giving them the government that money to reduce its burden. It may not get that. It may get something around 700 million or something like that. Now, the point is that to take into account how much the government gets in taxes in major categories and use that to compare. So if you take personal income tax, it gets about $1 billion a year. If you take corporate income tax, it gets about $1.3 billion a year. If you take oil and gas, it gets about $1.2 billion a year. Now, compare it to what it is asking the likes of the banks and the brokerages to give. Much more. So even if they give the government half of what it's asking, it's still more than it can raise in taxation. And the argument that we are trying to make the government understand is that the liquidity relief it seeks, it may not get all of it from private investors. It may have to come back and readjust the entire proposal and reoptimize so that maybe it cuts more of its expenditure and other such circumstances.